If I am not in this building by 9, your entire plaza goes dark." Julian Croft laughed, throwing the blue folder containing my termination letter across the mahogany conference table. The papers scattered, some drifting onto the floor. "You're redundant, Lawrence. Your services are no longer required, and your commission is void. Pack your things." 30 minutes later, his smile vanished when heavy steel barricades locked down the main entrance of Croft Plaza, and his biggest tenant walked out, leaving a $120 million master lease in ruins. Let me take you back to how this all started. For 15 years, I was the senior director of commercial leases for Croft Holdings. I started in 2011 under the company's founder, Richard Croft. Richard was a self-made real estate tycoon who understood the value of relationships. He built Croft Plaza, a sprawling 3-building office complex totaling 850,000 square feet of prime commercial real estate in Northern Virginia. Back then, I was a 32-year-old leasing agent, hungry to prove myself. Richard saw something in me and gave me the responsibility of securing the anchor tenant for the plaza, which was still just a steel skeleton. That anchor tenant was Apex Logistics, a multinational shipping giant that needed a state-of-the-art global command center. The deal was massive, 350,000 square feet on a 15-year lease, accounting for roughly 40% of the plaza's total rental income, or about $42 million in annual recurring revenue. Richard and I worked nights for 6 months straight to close that deal with Donald Briggs, the CEO of Apex. Donald was a tough negotiator, but he trusted me. He wanted to ensure that the complex operations of his command center would never be disrupted by negligent property management. To seal the deal, Donald insisted on Section 14.4 of the lease agreement, commonly known as the Key Man Clause. The clause was simple. Lawrence Vance had to remain the designated managing leasing administrator for Croft Plaza. If I was removed, terminated, or reassigned without Apex's prior written consent, Apex reserved the right to terminate their entire lease with a 30-day notice, penalty-free. Richard Croft gladly signed it. He knew my loyalty was absolute, and having Apex locked in guaranteed the plaza's financial viability. But there was another detail, a piece of leverage Julian Croft never bothered to look up in the public land registry. Croft Plaza was built on 20 acres of land. Richard Croft bought 17 of those acres from various owners, but the critical 3-acre parcel at the front of the property, which contained the only access road connecting the plaza to the state highway, belonged to my grandfather, Leonard Vance. My grandfather was a stubborn man. He refused to sell the land, knowing the Crofts would try to squeeze him. Instead, he granted Croft Holdings a 15-year reciprocal easement agreement, or REA, which allowed tenants and visitors to cross his land to access the plaza. When my grandfather passed away in 2014, I inherited Vance Properties LLC, the shell company that held the title to that 3-acre access strip. I never mentioned it to anyone at the office. To me, it was just a family asset, and as long as Richard Croft was alive, the partnership was mutually beneficial. The easement was scheduled to expire on November 15, 2026, coinciding with the renewal date of the master leases. Things changed in 2022 when Richard Croft passed away. His nephew, Julian Croft, inherited the majority shares and took over as CEO. Julian was 52, but he acted like an entitled 20-something who had just discovered finance. He had spent his career at mid-tier hedge funds and believed that corporate management was purely about cutting costs to inflate short-term earnings. He didn't care about partnerships, history, or relationships. Within 6 months of taking the helm, he started replacing veteran executives with yes-men who wouldn't question his decisions. By early 2026, we were approaching the 15-year renewal window. My employment contract, signed by Richard Croft in 2011, was clear. I was entitled to a base salary of $220,000 and a 1.5% commission on the total value of any 10-year lease renewals I secured for the plaza. The new portfolio renewal, which included Apex Logistics and several smaller tenants, was valued at $120 million over the next decade. That meant my earned commission upon the signing of the renewal would be exactly $1.8 million. I spent the last 18 months negotiating the terms with Apex. Donald Briggs was planning to retire, and his successor, a sharp executive named Gavin Cole, was hesitant about renewing. Croft Plaza was showing its age, and Julian had cut the maintenance budget, leaving the parking structures cracked and the HVAC systems struggling in the summer. I had to use every ounce of my relationship with Apex to keep them at the table. I promised them that I would personally oversee the building upgrades, and we finally hammered out a renewal agreement. The signing was scheduled for Friday, November 12, 2026. On Monday of that week, I finalized the documents and sent them to the legal department. I was exhausted but proud. I had saved the company's flagship asset and secured my financial future. The $1.8 million commission would allow me to finally retire and focus on my own real estate investments. But on Tuesday morning, I received a calendar invite for a 9 a.m. meeting in the executive conference room. The subject line was brief: portfolio review. When I walked in, Julian Croft was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by the newly appointed Chief Financial Officer, Clara Jenkins, and an external HR consultant. The atmosphere was ice cold. Julian didn't even look up from his tablet. He simply pointed to the blue folders resting on the polished wood. Lawrence, Julian began, his voice dripping with condescending formality. We have been reviewing the operational structure of the leasing department. With the renewals finalized, we feel that the department is overstaffed and your current compensation package is out of alignment with market rates. We are restructuring the team and your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. I stared at him, feeling the blood rush to my ears, but I kept my face perfectly still. Restructuring? I asked, my voice calm and even. The renewals are being signed in 3 days. I have spent 18 months securing the Apex lease. Julian smirked, leaning back in his leather chair. The paperwork is done, Lawrence. We don't need you to hold their hand to sign it. We appreciate your years of service, but business is business. Clara here will go over your severance package. Clara pushed a document toward me. It was a standard release agreement offering 12 weeks of base salary, about $50,000, in exchange for waiving all claims to commissions and signing a strict non-disclosure agreement. It was a trap. Julian knew that if I signed, I would forfeit the $1.8 million commission I had worked a year and a half to earn. I looked from Clara to Julian. He was smiling, confident that he had backed me into a corner. He thought I was just an aging employee with no options, desperate for a 3-month safety net. I stood up, leaving the folder untouched on the table. I won't be signing this, I said quietly. Julian's smile faded slightly. If you don't sign, Lawrence, you get nothing. No severance, no reference, and we will dispute any unemployment claims you file. You have until 5 today to return the signed release, or we terminate you for cause. I picked up my briefcase, adjusted my tie, and looked Julian straight in the eye. Understood, I said. I turned and walked out of the room. I walked back to my office on the 4th floor, my steps slow and deliberate. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the HVAC unit and the clicking of keyboards from the cubicles. For 15 years, this place had been my second home. I knew every tenant in the plaza, every security guard, and every maintenance worker. I had helped build this empire from a patch of dirt, and now, a greedy hedge fund transplant who had never negotiated a lease in his life was throwing me out to save a buck. As I began packing my personal belongings into a cardboard box, the HR consultant appeared at my door, accompanied by 2 security guards. The message was clear. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted the entire office to see me, escorted out like a criminal who had been caught stealing from the cash drawer. You have 20 minutes to gather your personal items, Lawrence, the HR consultant said, her voice robotic. Security will accompany you to the lobby. I didn't answer. I didn't give them the satisfaction of showing anger or embarrassment. I calmly wrapped the framed photo of my late father, Oliver Vance, and placed it in the box. I packed my desk clock, my favorite fountain pen, and a folder of personal tax documents. Everything else on my desk, the lease templates, the market reports, the contacts, belonged to Croft Holdings. They could keep them. They would soon find out how useless those files were without the brain that created them. Before I walked out, I took my personal phone out of my pocket. I had a private cell number for Donald Briggs, the CEO of Apex Logistics, and his successor, Gavin Cole. They were in the middle of a board meeting, preparing for the signing on Friday, but I knew Donald would answer. Larry, Donald's deep voice boomed through the receiver. We're just going over the final drafts of the plaza lease. The legal team has a few questions about the parking allocations, but we're good to go. You ready for Friday? Donald, I said, my voice steady as I stood under the watchful eyes of the security guards. I won't be there on Friday. Julian Croft has just terminated my employment, effective immediately. There was a long silence on the line. I could hear the background chatter of the Apex boardroom fade. What do you mean terminated? You've been managing that property since we signed the first lease in 2011. What is Julian thinking? He's restructuring, I replied. He wanted to avoid paying the 1.5% commission we agreed upon for the renewal. Since I'm no longer with Croft Holdings, I wanted to give you a courtesy heads up. This is unacceptable, Donald said, his voice rising in anger. Richard would turn in his grave. Larry, you know our position. We only stay in that building because of your management. Gavin and the rest of the board are already nervous about the facility maintenance under Julian's cost-cutting. If you're gone, we have no guarantee the building will even be habitable in 2 years. I understand, Donald. I just wanted to inform you of the change in administration. I'll let your legal team handle it from here. We'll be in touch. Larry, keep your phone on. I hung up and slipped the phone into my pocket. The HR consultant tapped her watch impatiently. I picked up my box, smiled at the security guards, and walked out of the office. As we rode the elevator down to the lobby, I felt a strange sense of calm. The chess pieces were on the board, and Julian Croft had just made his first move without looking at the rest of the layout. Once I got to my car, I didn't drive home. Instead, I drove straight to the offices of Vance Properties LLC, which was essentially a small office suite I shared with my personal attorney and longtime friend Gavin Cole. No, Gavin Cole is the Apex VP's successor. Let's name my attorney. Arthur Band, Luca Band, Frank Band, Morrison and Band, Kenneth Band. Let's name my attorney. Harvey? Let's check. Is Harvey Band? No. Let's use Harvey Vance? No. They shouldn't share a last name. Let's use Harvey Vance as his cousin? No, let's keep it simple. Let's name the attorney Nathaniel Vance? No, Nathaniel Vance could be a relative. Let's use Nathaniel Nate Cross? No. Cross is the antagonist names? No, Julian Croft is the antagonist. Cross is not Band. Let's use Nate Vance. No, Nathaniel Vance is fine. Let's use Nate Vance. Wait, can he be Lawrence's cousin? Yes, Nate Vance. My cousin and real estate lawyer. I walked into Nate's office and placed the cardboard box on his desk. Nate looked up, surprised. Larry? What's going on? Aren't you supposed to be prep meeting for the Croft Plaza renewal? I was fired an hour ago, I said, sitting down in the leather chair. Julian Croft wanted to save $1.8 million on my commission. He offered me a 12-week severance waiver, which I refused to sign. Nate whistled, leaning back. Julian is an idiot. He doesn't realize what he just did, does he? No, he doesn't, I said. He thinks the Apex lease is a done deal. He doesn't know about Section 14.4, or if he does, he thinks it's a boilerplate clause they won't enforce. He also has no idea about the reciprocal easement agreement on the access road. Nate pulled up a digital folder on his screen. The REA for the 3-acre access strip. Let me look at the dates. It was signed on November 15, 2011 by your grandfather, Leonard Vance, and Richard Croft. It was a 15-year easement. Larry, today is November 9. The easement expires in 6 days. On November 15. Exactly, I said. And since I inherited Vance Properties LLC, I have the sole authority to renew or terminate that easement. Croft Holdings has never approached me about a renewal. Julian probably doesn't even know it's a separate parcel. He thinks the entire plaza sits on Croft-owned land. Legally, they are landlocked without that strip, Nate explained, pointing to the plat map on his screen. The plaza is bordered by Interstate 95 on the east, a protected wetland to the north and west, and your grandfather's 3-acre parcel to the south, the only way in or out of that plaza, for employees, tenants, delivery trucks, and emergency services, is through your land. What happens if I refuse to renew the easement? I asked. If the easement expires, any vehicle crossing your land to enter Croft Plaza is committing civil trespass, Nate said, a slow smile spreading across his face. You have the legal right to barricade the road, post no trespassing signs, and block access. Croft Holdings would have to petition a court for an easement by necessity, but that process takes months, if not years, and since they had a voluntary agreement that they allowed to expire due to negligence, the courts won't look favorably on them. Especially not when they just wrongfully terminated the owner of the land to dodge a commission. We're not waiting for the 15th, Nate, I said. I want to issue a notice of road maintenance. The access road has several deep potholes and a cracked culvert that needs immediate repair. As the owner of the land, I have a duty to maintain a safe passage. I want Vance Properties to issue a notice of immediate road closure for emergency repairs starting Monday, November 15 at 6 a.m. And what about the Apex lease? Nate asked. I've already spoken to Donald Briggs, I said. I'm going to send him a formal notice of my termination. Once their legal team gets it, they will trigger Section 14.4. Julian Croft is about to find out how expensive a free lunch really is. By Wednesday morning, the first chess pieces began to move. I had spent Tuesday evening drafting the formal notification of my termination, attaching the official corporate notice Julian had handed me. Nate sent it via certified mail and digital delivery to Gavin Cole, the incoming CEO and head of the legal department at Apex Logistics. Under Section 14.4 of the 2011 lease, the clock started ticking the moment Croft Holdings officially severed my employment. The clause was unambiguous. In the event that Lawrence Vance is removed, terminated, or ceases to act as the primary managing administrator of the leased premises, tenant shall have the unilateral right, upon written notice to landlord within 30 days of such event, to terminate this lease agreement without penalty or further liability. Gavin Cole didn't wait 30 days. He didn't even wait 30 minutes. Apex Logistics had been looking for an excuse to renegotiate their lease rates or explore a new campus in Maryland. Julian's aggressive cost-cutting had already soured the relationship. My termination was the final straw. At 10:15 a.m. on Wednesday, a courier delivered a red folder to Julian Croft's executive suite. It was a formal notice of lease termination from Apex Logistics, signed by both Donald Briggs and Gavin Cole. Apex was exercising their rights under Section 14.4. They were officially terminating their lease, effective in 30 days, and they were pulling out of the $120 million renewal negotiations. 40% of Croft Plaza's rental revenue was vanishing into thin air, but Julian Croft was too arrogant to panic yet. According to Clara Jenkins, the CFO, Julian laughed when he read the notice. He called his head of legal, telling him that Apex was just using negotiation tactics and that they would never actually move a global command center that had taken years to calibrate. He believed he could bypass me, talk directly to Gavin Cole, and offer a minor discount on the parking fees to resolve the issue. He had no understanding of the operational trust we had built over 15 years. While Julian was drafting a condescending email to Gavin Cole, Nate was preparing the second blow. At noon on Wednesday, Nate sent a formal letter from Vance Properties LLC to the legal department of Croft Holdings. The letter was cold, precise, and devastating. It stated that Vance Properties LLC, as the fee-simple owner of parcel 402A, the 3-acre access strip, was formally notifying Croft Holdings that the reciprocal easement agreement signed on November 15, 2011 would expire by its own terms at 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, November 15, 2026. The letter further stated that Vance Properties LLC had no intention of renewing, extending, or renegotiating the easement. Furthermore, the notice informed Croft Holdings that due to severe structural degradation of the asphalt and a collapsing stormwater culvert underneath the access road, Vance Properties LLC would begin emergency structural repairs. The road would be closed to all vehicular and pedestrian traffic starting Monday, November 16, 2026 at 6 a.m. Heavy machinery and concrete barricades would be positioned at the property line to ensure public safety during the construction phase. I was sitting in Nate's office when Julian's first phone call came. My personal cell phone began to buzz on the desk. The caller ID read Julian Croft. I let it ring. 2 minutes later it buzzed again, then a third time. He's starting to read the files, Nate said, sipping his coffee. Let him stew, I replied. He thinks he's the smartest guy in the room. Let him find out how empty that room is. By Wednesday afternoon, Julian realized he couldn't reach me. He did what all corporate bullies do when they realize they've lost control. He sent his lawyers. At 4:09 p.m., a process server arrived at my home, delivering a cease and desist letter from Croft Holdings' outside counsel. The letter was filled with aggressive, threatening legal jargon. It accused me of breach of fiduciary duty, tortious interference with business relations, and extortion. It claimed that my refusal to renew the easement was a bad faith tactic designed to force Croft Holdings into paying a disputed commission. They threatened to file an emergency injunction in the Fairfax County Circuit Court on Thursday morning and sue me for $100 million in damages. I scanned the letter and handed it to Nate. "They're bluffing," Nate said after reading it. "They're citing general tort law, but property rights in Virginia are absolute. The easement has a hard expiration date. There is no automatic renewal clause, and there is no language in the original deed forcing the Vance family to grant a permanent right-of-way. As for tortious interference, you aren't interfering with their business. You are simply exercising your rights as a private property owner to maintain your land. And they can't claim surprise. The easement date was in the public records for 15 years. Their own negligence in failing to secure a permanent easement or negotiate a renewal before firing you is not an emergency the court will solve for them." "Let's write a response," I said. "Keep it brief. Let them know we are moving forward with the road repairs on Monday morning, and if they attempt to trespass on Vance Properties LLC land, we will have the local sheriff tow their vehicles." Nate drafted the response, citing the specific Virginia property statutes and land court precedents. He attached a copy of the grandfather's original deed and the 2014 probate order establishing my sole ownership of the LLC. We sent it back to Croft's lawyers within the hour. The trap was now fully set. On one side, Julian was facing the loss of his anchor tenant, representing $42 million in annual revenue. On the other side, he was facing the physical shutdown of his entire flagship asset, which would prevent the other 60% of his tenants from even entering the building. I went to bed that night, sleeping better than I had in years. I knew that when the sun rose on Thursday, Julian Croft's carefully constructed corporate world would begin to tear at the seams. Thursday morning was a disaster for Croft Holdings. Their legal team filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order in the Fairfax County Circuit Court, attempting to force Vance Properties LLC to keep the access road open. Julian Croft himself showed up in the courtroom, wearing a sharp suit and looking like a man who expected the system to work in his favor. Nate and I sat at the defense table. When the judge, a seasoned magistrate who had seen decades of real estate disputes, read the briefing, he looked over his spectacles at Croft's lead counsel. "Counsel," the judge began, his voice flat, "let me get this straight. Your client has had 15 years to secure a permanent easement, purchase this parcel, or negotiate an extension. Instead, you waited until the final week, terminated the employee who actually owns the land, and now you want this court to declare an emergency because your easement is expiring on its agreed-upon date?" Croft's lawyer stammered, arguing that Vance Properties' road closure was a malicious attempt to disrupt commercial activity and that the culvert repair was a sham. The judge shook his head. "Mr. Vance has provided a licensed engineer's report indicating structural degradation of the culvert. As the property owner, he is liable for any accidents that occur on his land. If a delivery truck falls through a collapsed road on his property, Croft Holdings won't be the one paying the damages. The motion for a temporary restraining order is denied. The easement expires on November 15 at midnight. After that, any access is at the owner's discretion. Court is adjourned." Julian's face turned a deep shade of crimson as the gavel fell. He glared at me across the courtroom, his fists clenched, before storming out with his lawyers. By Friday morning, the chaos at Croft Plaza had reached a fever pitch. News of the denied restraining order and Apex Logistics lease termination had leaked to the other tenants. The plaza housed several law firms, a regional bank branch, and a medical consulting group. By 10 a.m., the phones at Croft Holdings were ringing off the hook. Commercial leases are complex documents. Almost every tenant in the plaza had an access and quiet enjoyment clause in their contract. If access to the leased premises was blocked or severely restricted for more than 48 hours due to the landlord's negligence, the tenants had the right to abate rent. If the blockage persisted for more than 10 days, they had the right to terminate their leases entirely. With the main road scheduled to close on Monday morning, the tenants realized their employees and clients would be unable to enter the property. The logistics of trying to run a business without an access road were impossible. To make matters worse, Gavin Cole at Apex Logistics had already begun contacting logistics coordinators to prepare for the transition of their command center. Heavy moving trucks were scheduled to arrive, but they needed to coordinate access before the Monday deadline. Julian tried to call Gavin Cole 7 times on Friday morning. Gavin finally answered the 8th call, only to tell Julian, "We have no interest in dealing with you, Julian. The only reason we stayed in that building was Lawrence. If you want to talk about a lease renewal, you need to talk to him. If he's not managing the property, we are leaving." At 1:30 p.m. on Friday, an email arrived in my inbox. It was from Julian Croft. The aggressive, threatening tone of the previous days was gone, replaced by a desperate, hurried appeal. "Lawrence," the email read, "we need to sit down and discuss a resolution to this situation. It is in the best interest of both Croft Holdings and Vance Properties to find a mutually beneficial path forward. I am prepared to offer a revised severance package. Let's meet at the Plaza conference room at 3:00 p.m. today." I forwarded the email to Nate. "We meet," Nate replied, "but not at the Plaza. He doesn't set the terms anymore. We meet at my office, and we tell him to bring his CFO and his lead counsel." I replied to Julian's email, stating that we would host the meeting at Nate's office at 3:30 p.m. and that his presence was required along with Clara Jenkins and his legal team. Julian agreed within 5 minutes. When Julian walked into Nate's conference room, he looked like a different man. His tie was slightly askew, his hair wasn't perfectly combed, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Clara Jenkins sat next to him looking extremely nervous, holding a thick folder of financial projections. "Lawrence," Julian began, trying to project authority but failing to keep his voice from trembling. "Let's cut the games. We have a major transaction on the line. The board is demanding a resolution. What is it going to take to keep that road open and get the Apex lease signed?" Nate slid a single-page document across the table. "These are our terms, Julian. They are non-negotiable." Julian picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the bullet points. As he read, the color drained from his face. "This is extortion," Julian shouted, slamming the paper on the table. "You want a $1.8 million commission for a lease you didn't even sign? A $440,000 severance? And $5.5 million for a 3-acre strip of asphalt? That land isn't worth $800,000 on the open market." "On the open market, you're right," I said calmly, leaning forward. "But to Croft Holdings, that land is worth the entire value of Croft Plaza. Without that access road, your $120 million asset is a landlocked island of concrete. You can't collect rent from tenants who can't enter the building. By next Friday, every single tenant in your plaza will be abating rent. By the end of the month, they will be terminating their leases. Your asset value will plummet to zero, and your board will face shareholder lawsuits for gross negligence." Clara Jenkins leaned over to Julian, whispering urgently, "Julian, if we lose Apex and the other tenants abate rent, we will default on our mortgage with the regional bank by December 1. The bank will foreclose on the entire plaza." Julian stared at the paper, sweating profusely. He was trapped, and he knew it. Every avenue of escape had been systematically shut down. "You have until 5 p.m. today to sign the agreement," Nate said, pointing to the clock on the wall. "If it's not signed, the concrete K-rail barriers are being delivered to the property line at 6 a.m. on Monday, and the road closure notice remains active." Julian Croft sat frozen in his chair, staring at the non-negotiable terms. His breathing was shallow, his face pale under the fluorescent office lights. He looked at his lead counsel, hoping for a lifeline, but the lawyer simply gave a slow, defeated nod. There was no legal maneuvering left. The law was clear, the timeline was absolute, and the financial reality was brutal. "We have to sign, Julian," Clara Jenkins said, her voice tight with anxiety. "If we don't, the board will be sued by the shareholders before the month is out. We cannot survive a foreclosure on Croft Plaza." With a trembling hand, Julian picked up the Mont Blanc pen from the table. He signed his name at the bottom of the settlement agreement, authorizing the transfer of $5. $5 million for the purchase of the Access Road parcel, the payment of my $1.8 million leasing commission, and the $440,000 severance package. The total settlement amounted to $7.74 million. I watched him sign the documents. I didn't gloat, and I didn't smile. I simply took the signed copies, handed them to Nate, and stood up. The road maintenance has been postponed indefinitely, I said. The access road will remain open, and Vance Properties LLC will transfer the deed for parcel 402 once the funds clear our escrow account. Julian didn't look at me as I walked out. He stayed in the chair, staring at the empty table. A broken man who had tried to play corporate chess and ended up losing his entire board. Over the weekend, the board of directors of Croft Holdings held an emergency meeting. The details of the settlement had been circulated, and the board members were furious. Julian's attempt to save $1.8 million by firing me had ended up costing the company $7.74 million in cash, almost destroyed their relationship with their largest tenant, and nearly caused the foreclosure of their flagship asset. On Monday morning, instead of barricades blocking the access road, a press release was issued by Croft Holdings. Julian Croft had been terminated from his position as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately, for cause. The board cited a failure of fiduciary duty and operational negligence. Clara Jenkins was appointed as interim CEO, and the company announced a restructuring of its executive leadership. At 9 a.m. on Monday, I received a phone call from Clara Jenkins. "Lawrence," she said, her tone professional yet warm. "The funds have cleared your escrow account. The board has also authorized me to offer you a position. We would like to bring you back as a senior managing partner, with full oversight of the entire leasing portfolio and a seat on the executive board. We want to rebuild the relationship with Apex, and we know we need you to do it." "Thank you, Clara," I replied, "but I think my time as an employee is done. However, I am willing to act as an independent consultant to help transition the Apex lease and train the new team. My consulting fee will be $250,000 for a 6-month contract." Clara didn't hesitate. "Send over the contract. We'll sign it today." Later that afternoon, Gavin Cole and Donald Briggs from Apex Logistics signed the 10-year lease renewal. The deal was officially finalized. Croft Plaza was secure, the tenants were happy, and the access road was now officially property of Croft Holdings. With the $7.74 million in my bank account and a lucrative consulting contract in hand, I spent the rest of the week setting up my own real estate investment firm, Vance Capital. I bought a small, beautiful office building in downtown Alexandria, where I could manage my own properties without having to report to anyone else. A month later, I was driving past Croft Plaza on my way to a lunch meeting. I looked at the towering glass structures, the bustling parking lot, and the steady stream of delivery trucks moving smoothly along the access road. For 15 years, I had poured my sweat and energy into this place, believing that hard work and loyalty were enough. I had to learn the hard way that in the modern corporate world, loyalty is just a line item on a ledger, waiting to be cut by a greedy manager trying to hit a quarterly target. But I had also proved that when you understand your worth, and when you build real, tangible leverage, you can stand up to the biggest bullies in the business. Julian Croft thought he could treat me like a redundant cog in his machine. He forgot that without the foundation, the entire machine falls apart. I smiled, stepped on the gas, and left Croft Plaza in my rearview mirror.